It's my great pleasure to speak today to the International Congress. My name is Joseph Thomas, and I'll be discussing the CADence cardiovascular diagnostic system, coronary turbulence, and what I truly hope will be a fascinating view into what I believe is the future of medical diagnostics. If you look at the current state of our diagnostic testing in cardiology, it is little changed in the last 20, even 30 years, while really everything else in life and medicine has changed with modern technology. If you look at what we're doing in non-invasive testing, the U.S. spends $400 billion per year on cardiovascular care, and that's going to double to $800 billion in the next 10, 15 years. And 20% of that is spent on cardiovascular testing and imaging. So it brings up two important questions. What is the efficiency and the diagnostic yield and the resource impact of our current methods? And the second question, can we touch more lives with better technology? And I think everyone, hopefully, at the end of this talk will agree that the answer is yes. So the current situation with cardiac testing is one of high utilization and low yield. On the left panel is the rate of nuclear stress test abnormalities, and this is in 40,000 patients from Cedars-Sinai. Over the last 20 years, the rate of abnormal test results has gone from 40% to below 10%. And the rate of ischemic results on a nuclear stress test is actually 5%. So high utilization, low yield. If you look at the right panel, that's the green line across the middle, is the frequency of using myocardial imaging in chest pain patients. And even across hospitals that do it more frequently, it doesn't result in more revascularizations, as shown in those light blue circles at the bottom. So there's not much diagnostic yield. We all believe that in general, the accuracy of our current stress testing is acceptable, 70, 80, 85%. And I think 85% is what we're all taught to believe is the diagnostic accuracy of nuclear stress testing or stress echo. If you want to look at some contemporary studies, on the left is CE Mark, and in that study, nuclear stress testing had a sensitivity to detect ischemic coronary lesions of only 57%. The specificity was excellent, but the sensitivity was quite low. If you want to look at the eVinci study from about 3 years ago, the diagnostic yield, and the accuracy of SPECT, 70% sensitivity, specificity only about 65%. And so even our current testing is not as good as we think. So I'd like to bring up this thought, what's old is new, and that is where CADence is based. So we've commonly used flow turbulence as a diagnostic target. When we're at the patient bedside, auscultating for abdominal bruits, carotid bruits, listening to heart sounds and murmurs, even using a blood pressure cuff to detect carotid cough sounds, that's detecting flow turbulence and the acoustic signature of turbulent blood flow. In 1967, Dock and Zonarich described the eponymous Dock's murmur, and they actually had found patients with critical LAD stenosis, and they attributed a low-frequency diastolic murmur to flow turbulence across that lesion. So there are two important physiological effects of a coronary stenosis. The first is a pressure drop across that stenosis. That's exactly what we detect when we do FFR or IFR or CT-FFR. And the second is that smooth laminar flow is disrupted, creating flow turbulence, with two consequences. One is there is a infinitesimally small release of heat, and the second, maybe the most important, is that creation of turbulent flow releases acoustic mechanical waves, essentially sound, and that's the target. So here you'll see a benchtop model of a vascular stenosis. That bottom line, number 3, is just background noise. The middle line, number 2, is essentially the acoustic signature of flow through a normal pipe. And then in that red box, line 1, you'll see with flow through a stenosed pipe, there are multiple low-frequency peaks. So that is turbulence. If you want to use coronary turbulence as a diagnostic target to detect CAD, you've got to know the timing. So the timing peaks with coronary blood flow in diastole, really early to mid-diastole, 200 milliseconds after the second heart sound. You have to understand the limitations of detecting coronary turbulence. Well, the sounds are very faint. They're buried in the chest. There are competing intrathoracic noises, lung noises. They're competing extrathoracic noises, even environmental noise in the room. And you have to understand your target. What are the characteristic frequencies of coronary turbulence? And those have been described, as you'll see in this table, over the last few decades. And it's really 50 hertz to 800 hertz. Here's a beautiful example of coronary turbulence testing. This is from early CADence experience at the University of Minnesota. On the left, you can see angiograms. This patient has a severe stenosis in their distal right coronary artery. In the red hatched lines, in the green, you can see that is after angioplasty and stenting. And on the right, you can see this is a log Gabor frequency spectrogram. So you can see the signal for the second heart sound and the first heart sound. Between that is diastole, and on the panel with the red hatch markings, there is low frequency acoustic signal detected. That on the right, you can see is essentially abolished after treatment of that coronary stenosis. So this is essentially detection and use of coronary turbulence, and I think proof of concept with the pre and post. So the foundational early CADence experience came from the Acoustic trial. That was 127 subjects who got tested using the first predecessor unit prior to angiography. And what that showed in 127 subjects is that CADence had a 70% sensitivity and an 80% specificity to detect severe coronary disease. This graphical representation of all our earliest data shows that diagnostic accuracy performance was best right at that 50% diameter stenosis cut point, where sensitivity and specificity were 70%, 72%. But I want to take your attention to the purple line heading up to the right corner of that graph. It's in a red box. That's the negative predictive value. And so maybe the best opportunity for this technology is in negative predictive value. So look, for patients with stenoses of 70, 80, 90%, the negative predictive value of acoustic detection or CADence testing was in excess of 80, 90%, and that is incredibly powerful. So the first generation CADence system involves this handheld digital stethoscope, a patient-specific booklet that's used to initialize and then sequence the 4 steps of the study. It's wireless, it's CE marked in 2014, and we actually presented this at the CRT meeting in 2015, where we won an Innovations Award. And this device is coupled with enhanced cloud-based signal processing and analytics. The testing process, well, there are 4 determined sites on the chest wall. Each acquisition at each site takes 20 seconds. It does require a supine patient in a quiet environment. And the handheld actually provides user feedback. So you can see here that green light means that an adequate signal has been detected. And when a report's returned, it gives answers of either normal, diseased, or inconclusive for the presence of severe coronary disease. And this has been tested in a large blinded study at over 20 sites in the US. And this is the Turbulence trial, and we completed it about 2 years ago. The aim was to assess the diagnostic accuracy of CADence. The primary endpoint was non-inferiority of CADence to the historical performance of nuclear stress testing, considering that nuclear stress testing is considered the gold standard non-invasive test for coronary disease. The study is double-blinded, meaning that the clinicians, patients, data analytics, angiographic core labs were all blinded to the results of CADence, and all endpoints were done, validated by angiography or cardiac CT, and adjudicated by core labs. And so in this study, there were 763 subjects in the per protocol population. The population looks identical to every other major non-invasive testing study we've done lately. Average age 59, a quarter of the patients were diabetics, and over 2/3 either had hypertension or hyperlipidemia. So of those 763 subjects who all had acoustic detection, CADence testing, and an angiogram, 15% had severe CAD as defined by a 70% stenosis in a major coronary artery, or 50% left main disease. And the final result, well, it showed that CADence did meet its endpoint for sensitivity, 78% sensitivity to detect severe coronary disease, non-inferior to the gold standard nuclear stress test, and right in line with what we've expected out of our tests. CADence did not meet specificity, but this is back to the point. The value of CADence is in sensitivity and negative predictive value. In Turbulence, the negative predictive value for the CADence test was 91%, and that was equivalent to the clinical site-read nuclear stress test that all the subjects underwent. And so we have a new option to exclude coronary disease in patients. We've now moved on to the third generation, third-gen CADence. It incorporates a multipolar ECG lead in its base. It's 4G cellular and Wi-Fi enabled, so it can be used anywhere on the planet where there is a cellular signal or Wi-Fi. The report is returned to a tablet or email. The analytics include even more advanced deep learning AI. The report format I'll go over shortly, and as I said, this is CE marked in 2014 and it received FDA approval in the United States last year as a clinical decision support tool for acoustic and ECG analysis. So this is the testing process with that third-gen CADence. The device is used to collect de-identified patient data. That takes about 8 minutes. Wireless upload to the cloud for data pre-processing, analytics, return to the physician is that report, all in 20 minutes. So this is the third-gen CADence coronary disease or coronary turbulence report. It demonstrates and reports whether coronary turbulence is detected, that's the x-axis, and it shows you in color scale what the confidence in that data is, and data quality both on the y-axis. So in this example, that red dot is far to the left. It says that coronary turbulence is not detected. And what's the confidence? Well, it's in the yellow, and on the percent scale, that's 80%. So for this patient, to help the physician make clinical decisions, there's an 80% chance that no turbulence is detectable. And that is as good as what we've been doing. Beyond coronary turbulence, so there are applications of CADence for valve dysfunction and heart sounds and in global vascular health assessments. And this sort of tool is exactly what can be used in screening, telemedicine, and remote care, can be used in long-term surveillance, and I think where it may have a real role, triage to more complex, more costly, more time-intensive advanced imaging. The current report provides the physician with a sound file, ECG and valve analysis, and outside the US, that coronary turbulence report. So here's an example of the ECG and valve analysis. This is a normal subject. The top line is ECG. The second in blue is phonocardiogram. The third is new. It's energy, which is essentially loudness. And on the bottom is that frequency spectrogram activity. Here you can see the first and second heart sounds with no additional low frequency activity. This is an example of a patient with aortic stenosis. And so if you look at the bottom panel, you can see first heart sound, second heart sound. Between those two is systole. And you can see what's actually the visual depiction of that classic harsh crescendo decrescendo murmur of aortic stenosis in a characteristic sort of low to mid-frequency pitch. So CADence actually meets all the unmet needs and limitations we have with current modalities. So there isn't any need for bulky capital equipment. It doesn't take up much space. As far as trained personnel, medical technologists, nurses, physicians can all be trained to use this system. There's no need for pharmacologic stress agents, iodinated contrast, radiopharmaceuticals. There is zero radiation. Patient preparation is minimal. And this is actually a feasible application across the globe, which isn't always true for some of our technologies. The physician clinical decision support report helps guide physician interpretation, and accuracy essentially matches what we've been getting from our current testing. So what would the effect be if you used and applied third-gen CADence into low and intermediate risk chest pain patients? Well, you'd achieve a reduction in downstream testing, primarily image stress testing and stress echocardiography, and then a reduction in cost of care and even more timely care. So if you applied the results of Turbulence, where there was a 78% sensitivity and a net 91% negative predictive value for coronary disease, you would have to perform 1/3 fewer expensive nuclear stress tests, and you'd end up with the exact same number of false negative tests if you went nuclear stress first. So to conclude, CADence is a model for really disruptive technology in the cardiovascular space. It's both CE marked and FDA approved. It's part of the Internet of Medical Things. It involves artificial intelligence and machine learning, meaning that the more data it has, the better it will be. And as we saw from the Turbulence clinical trial, excellent sensitivity and negative predictive value for severe coronary disease. So as a clinical decision support tool, you can assess coronary turbulence of coronary disease, valve evaluations and screening, use it as a tool for triage to advanced imaging, it can be part of telemedicine and remote care, and also it now has 6 and 12 lead wireless ECG capability. And so to conclude, if you had to look forward, it's almost impossible to believe that in 10 years or 20 years we'll be using the same test methods that we used 30 years ago, but that's what we're doing. Systems like CADence really are a view to the future, and they leverage exactly what we leverage every day in our everyday life. Miniature, digital, cloud-connected, advanced technology, and it's really the future of medical testing. So thank you very much.